Imagine this scenario. It is, let's say, Tuesday afternoon. You are sitting in a boardroom that is just slightly too warm, The air conditioning is humming, the coffee's a bit stale.
Oh, I know that room. I think I've spent half my career in that room.
I think we all have. And at the head of the table sits a manager with a very, very impressive title. Let's call him the Director of Strategic Implementation. He's talking, he's gesturing, he is issuing commands about some new procurement protocol that, frankly, nobody asked for.
And everyone's nodding. The heads are bobbing up and down.
Exactly. Everyone is nodding physically, but mentally. They are completely checked out. They're on their phones, under the table. They're planning dinner. They're wondering if they can sneak out early to beat the traffic.
And you just know the second they walk out of that room, absolutely nothing is going to change.
Nothing. The director thinks he's leading, but he's really just talking to himself.
The classic zombie meeting.
Right. But then, fast forward 10 minutes, you're at the coffee machine, and there's someone else there, maybe a mid-level buyer or, someone from IT. They have no fancy title.
Right.
And they're speaking quietly, and 5 people are just hanging on their every word. And if that person says, look, this new project is going to be a disaster, then that project is effectively dead.
It's over, regardless of what the director with the fancy title just said.
And that right there, that disconnect is what we are unpacking today.
It's the gap between authority and actual power. And understanding that gap, I think, defines the success or failure of, well, pretty much every organization.
It really does. So we're going deep into the invisible mechanics of the workplace. We have got a huge stack of research here, a really comprehensive syllabus on strategic ethical leadership.
Specifically, we're pulling from Chamber Business Training and the CIPS curriculum, Unit L6M1, Learning Objective 3 to be exact.
And looking at this, I have to say, this is not your standard how to be a boss guide.
No, not at all. It's more like an anatomy lesson for an organization. We're not just talking about org charts. We're going to explore where power actually comes from. And a little spoiler, it is rarely just the job title.
We're also going to get into the nitty-gritty of equality, diversity, and inclusion, the real operational side of it.
And of course, change. Why does changing a simple process sometimes feel like you're trying to start a revolution? We're getting into the psychology of that.
So the mission for this deep dive is, I think, pretty simple. By the time we're done, we want you to walk away understanding not just how to lead, but why people follow.
And maybe even more importantly, why they resist.
Okay, so let's start at the foundation. Section 1, the anatomy of power. The source material kicks off with a definition I think is so important because it's broader than most people assume.
It is. It defines power as the ability to exert influence over objects, persons, or situations.
And notice what's not in that definition. It doesn't say power is having a corner office. It doesn't say power is controlling the budget.
Exactly. It's about the ability to influence. The syllabus is really clear on this. This power may or may not be formally given to you. You can have zero authority on paper and hold massive power in practice.
Or, you can be the CEO and have very little actual influence on the day-to-day culture.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Which brings us to, I think, the heavy hitters of power theory, French and Raven.
Ah, yes. The big 6. We have to walk through these carefully because, honestly, if you understand these 6 things, you can decode about 90% of office politics.
It's true. Once you see this framework, you can't unsee it. It's like putting on special glasses that reveal the invisible matrix of your workplace.
All right, so let's start with the most obvious one, the one everyone thinks of first. Legitimate power.
This is the badge. It's the power that comes from your formal position in the organizational hierarchy.
So I'm your boss. The org chart says so. Therefore, you have to do what I say.
That's it in a nutshell. You have the right to make demands, and I have an obligation to obey because of our employment contract. It's purely structural.
But going back to our zombie meeting at the start, legitimate power only gets you so far, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It gets you compliance. That's the key word. If I have legitimate power, I can tell you to write a report, and you'll probably do it. You want to keep your job, you want to get paid.
But it doesn't guarantee you'll do a good job.
Not at all. It doesn't guarantee creativity or that you'll offer solutions or that you'll stay late to fix a crisis without being told to. Legitimate power buys you the minimum viable effort.
So if you're a leader relying only on your title...
You're just a manager. You're not actually leading anyone.
Okay, so if legitimate power is the baseline, what's next? The source brings up reward power.
The carrot. This is the ability to give people things they want in exchange for them doing what you want.
And everyone's mind immediately goes to money, right? Bonuses, raises.
Of course. But the source material makes a really insightful point here, especially for supply chain leaders. Budgets are often tight. You can't just hand out raises whenever you feel like it.
So what does reward power look like when you can't just throw money at people?
Often intangible. It's approval. It's public recognition. That employee of the month plaque is a form of reward power.
A slightly cheesy one, but yes.
A very cheesy one, but
Yeah.
it works on some level. But it goes deeper. It's giving a junior buyer a spot at the table in a high-profile negotiation so they can learn. It's giving someone the more desirable shift in a warehouse. It's approving their request to go to that conference they're really excited about.
So it's about controlling access to desirable resources, and those resources don't have to be financial.
Exactly. If you possess things that other people value, even if that thing is just a good word to the vice president, and you can grant access to them, you have power.
Which brings us to the inevitable dark side of that coin, coercive power.
The stick. Yeah. This is the power to punish, to threaten, to intimidate.
Do this or you're fired. Miss this deadline and I'll put you on a performance improvement plan. Complain again and I'll deny your vacation request.
It sounds pretty barbaric when you lay it out like that, doesn't it? But it is incredibly common.
Way more common than people like to admit.
It is. And the source offers a really critical, so what, analysis on this. Coercive power is, without a doubt, effective at stopping behavior.
What do you mean by that?
If someone is stealing from the warehouse, or they're consistently violating safety protocols on the factory floor, you use coercive power. You don't negotiate safety. You stop the dangerous behavior immediately.
Okay, that makes sense.
But, and this is a huge but, it is absolutely terrible at starting positive behavior. It breeds resentment. It creates a culture of fear where nobody takes any risks.
And in a field like procurement or supply chain, you need people to be proactive. You need them to spot risks before they become disasters.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And a terrified employee is a liability.
Right.
They will never bring you bad news until it's a full-blown crisis because they're afraid of the messenger getting shot. So coercive power gets you the bare minimum of compliance and absolutely zero commitment.
It just shuts down communication. Okay, let's move on to the sources of power that I find more interesting because they don't require a budget or a title. First up, expert power.
Now in the world of procurement and supply chain, this is absolute gold.
I can imagine.
Expert power is based purely on your high level of skill or knowledge. If you're the only person in the company who really understands how to navigate the complexities of a contract with a supplier in Vietnam.
Or you're the only one who knows how to fix the ERP system when it inevitably crashes.
Yes. Then you have immense power. People have to come to you. They rely on you. The project cannot move forward without your input.
You become a bottleneck, but, in a good way. For you, anyway.
At least in a powerful way. Now, there is a trap here. Sometimes people with a lot of expert power can become hoarders of that knowledge.
Right. They don't want to train anyone else because they're afraid of losing that special status.
Exactly. But generally speaking, this is the person that everyone from the intern to the VP actually listens to. They know how the engine of the business really works.
This feels connected to the next one, referent power. The source calls it the charisma factor.
It is. But it's not just about being popular or being the funny one in the office.
What's deeper than that?
Much deeper. It's based on personality, integrity, and what the source calls worthiness. It's kind of magnetic quality. People follow you because they identify with you, they respect you, they want to be associated with you.
Can you give an example?
Think about a mentor you had early in your career, one you would have walked through fire for, not because they could give you a raise, but because you just believed in them as a person.
I know exactly who you're talking about.
That's referent power. It builds a kind of deep personal loyalty that a paycheck or a threat could never, ever achieve.
Okay, and the last of the big six, informational power. Now, how is this different from expert power? They sound similar.
It's a subtle but really important distinction. Expert power is, I know how to do this thing. Informational power is, I have the data or access that you need. It's more of a gatekeeper role.
Okay. The gatekeeper.
Think about an executive assistant. They often have very low legitimate power on the org chart. But if they control the CEO's calendar, or they're the only one who knows the process for getting an emergency PO approved.
They have massive power.
Massive informational power. If you get on their bad side, you don't get the meeting. You don't get the signature. Leaders who underestimate or disrespect the gatekeepers do so at their own peril.
So, looking at all 6 of these, it seems pretty clear that the most effective leaders aren't just relying on one.
No, not at all. They're like a chef using different spices. They use their legitimate power as a foundation. I mean, someone has to sign the paychecks, but they build their actual day-to-day influence using their expert power and their referent power.
Because if you only have coercive power, you're just a tyrant.
And if you only have referent power, you're a popular friend. But you might struggle to get people to do the difficult, unpleasant tasks. You really need to have a full dashboard of options.
The syllabus also brings in another perspective on organizational power from Robert Fincham. He breaks it down into 3 different levels: processual, institutional, and internal. Now, this sounds a bit more academic, but I think it's useful. What does he mean by processual power?
Think of processual as being all about the process of interaction. Fincham's point is that power isn't a static thing you just hold, like a trophy on your shelf.
It's not a noun, it's a verb.
That's a great way to put it. It emerges from the daily interactions, the politics, the negotiations of the office. It's dynamic and fluid. You might have power in the morning meeting because you have the sales data everyone needs, but you might lose it in the afternoon because you upset a key stakeholder from another department.
So it's always shifting.
Always. It's a constant game of social tennis.
Okay, so then what's institutional power?
That's the bigger picture. It's the idea that power also comes from external social and economic structures that are much bigger than the company itself. Well, for example, a procurement manager has power inside a company because the broader capitalist structure we live in values cost savings and efficiency. The institution of the market validates their role and gives it power.
So if we lived in a society that didn't care about profit, their power would just evaporate.
It would be significantly diminished, yes. Their power is contingent on the values of the wider institution.
And the third one, internal power.
That's about the organization's own capacity, its own muscle. It's the resources, the brand recognition, the market share, the legitimacy it holds as a company.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. A junior buyer at a massive company like Walmart has more internal power when negotiating with a small supplier than a senior buyer at a tiny mom-and-pop shop does.
Even if the person at the small shop is more skilled?
Yes, because the power isn't just in the person, it's in the massive organization standing behind them. The internal power of the company props up the individual.
All of this seems to lead to a constant tension that the syllabus discusses, this balance between order and flexibility.
The eternal struggle of management. How much do I control and how much do I let go?
It cites Reeves and Nell on this. What's their take?
They argue that it's a central dilemma. On one hand, you absolutely need order. You need common policies, centralized purchasing, consistent contract terms. In a global supply chain, if every regional buyer is doing their own thing,
You have chaos. You lose all your leverage, you create massive risk, you're probably getting ripped off.
total chaos. You need the machine to run smoothly and predictably. That's order.
But if you have too much order,
You crush flexibility. You create a rigid bureaucracy where no one can make a decision without 10 levels of approval. You stifle innovation. The source ties this directly to the whole centralized versus decentralized debate.
which is a debate every big company seems to have every 5 years. They centralize and they get too slow, so they decentralize, then they get too chaotic, so they centralize again.
It's a pendulum. A fully centralized structure with a strong HQ calling all the shots is easier to control. You get consistency, strategic focus, economies of scale. But it's slow. A customer in a local branch in, say, Singapore has a unique problem, and they have to wait for an answer from the head office in London.
And by the time the answer comes, the customer has gone to a competitor.
Exactly. Whereas a decentralized structure empowers that local manager in Singapore. They know the local market, they can react quickly, they can provide better customer service.
But the risk is that they go rogue. They create a policy that's inconsistent with the rest of the company and creates a legal or financial nightmare.
That's the risk. So what Reeves and Nell argue is that the best leaders don't pick one or the other. They build a culture that balances both. They use systems to create order, but they also use emotional intelligence to understand their people and grant autonomy where it makes sense. It's not an either. It's a constant balancing act.
That mention of emotional intelligence is a perfect bridge to the next major section of our deep dive: equality, diversity, and inclusion. ED&I.
A massive topic in modern leadership, and rightly so. And I want to be very clear, the source material here treats this as a core operational imperative, not just a feel-good PR exercise.
And it's very specific about defining the terms, which I think is important because people tend to lump them all together.
They do, and they shouldn't. They're distinct concepts.
Okay, so let's define them clearly based on the source. Let's start with diversity.
Diversity is the what. It's about recognizing and valuing all the individual differences in your workforce: race, gender, age, religion, disability, sexual orientation, neurodiversity, socioeconomic background, all of it.
So it's about having a mix. It's the numbers. Can you look around the room and see a representation of society?
Essentially, yes. It's the composition of your team.
Okay, then what about equality?
Equality is about fairness and justice.
Yeah.
It's ensuring that everyone has equal status, rights, and opportunities. It's about having a baseline of zero tolerance for discrimination.
So it means the rules of the game, the processes for promotion, for pay, for opportunities are the same for everyone, regardless of their background.
Exactly. It's the level playing field.
And that brings us to inclusion.
Inclusion is the how. It's the culture. It's about actively engaging every one of those diverse individuals so they feel welcomed, valued, respected, and part of the collective success.
You could have a very diverse team on paper.
You could.
Yeah.
And you could have perfectly equal policies.
Yeah.
But if people don't feel like they belong, if they feel like their unique perspective is consistently ignored in meetings because they don't fit into the dominant culture, then you do not have inclusion.
I've heard the saying, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance.
That's a perfect summary. It's
Yeah.
about active participation and belonging, not just presence.
Now, the source material lays out a very clear business case for this. It asks the tough question. Beyond it being the right thing to do, what's the actual ROI for a business?
And the answers are pretty compelling from a strategic standpoint. The first and most obvious one is about talent.
Widening the recruitment pool.
Exactly. If you only ever hire from one demographic, say men from a specific set of universities, you are ignoring a vast, vast ocean of talent. In a market where skills like data analytics or strategic sourcing are hard to find, you simply cannot afford to ignore huge chunks of the population.
So it's just a numbers game, in a way. More applicants means a better chance of finding the best person.
It is, but it's also about performance. The data is pretty clear that diverse teams, when managed well, consistently outperform homogeneous teams in problem solving and innovation.
Because you have more perspectives in the room, you're less likely to have groupthink.
Precisely. If you're designing a supply chain for a global market, but your entire leadership team looks and thinks exactly the same, you're going to have massive blind spots. You'll miss cultural nuances, consumer preferences, things a more diverse team would catch in a heartbeat.
There's also a link to customer satisfaction, right?
A huge one. If your customers are diverse, and they're having a team that reflects that diversity builds trust and understanding, it helps you serve your market better.
And I really appreciate the honesty of the source material here. It doesn't just paint a perfect rosy picture. It explicitly talks about the burdens and costs.
And we have to be realistic about this. If we pretend that implementing a robust ED&I strategy is effortless, we set leaders up for failure.
So what are some of those real-world challenges?
Well, for one, formulating and administering these policies takes time and money. You need HR resources, you need training programs, you might need consultants. It's an investment.
The source also mentions potential communication difficulties.
It does. In a team with a wide range of ethnicities and cultural backgrounds, you might have different communication styles, different approaches to hierarchy, or even language barriers. Those are real challenges that have to be actively managed. You can't just throw people in a room and hope for the best.
And there are costs associated with flexibility.
Yes. If you're serious about inclusion, you need to accommodate diverse needs. That could mean flexible working hours for parents, prayer rooms for religious employees, accessible technology for those with disabilities. It adds a layer of complexity to scheduling and management compared to a one-size-fits-all approach.
So why point all this out so explicitly? Is it to discourage people?
Not at all. It's to prepare them. If a leader ignores this friction, they can't manage it. The point is that the benefits massively outweigh these costs, but the costs are real and they need to be planned and budgeted for. You have to invest in the inclusion part to unlock the benefits of the diversity part.
Okay, now let's talk about the dark side of this. The syllabus gets into the specifics of discrimination.
It does. It lists the four main forms: direct, indirect, victimization, and harassment.
Now, direct discrimination is pretty obvious. I'm not hiring you because you are a woman, for example, but explain indirect discrimination. That feels much trickier.
It's much more subtle. And worryingly, it's often unintentional. Indirect discrimination is when you have a policy or a rule that applies to everyone equally on paper.
So it looks fair.
It looks fair, but in practice, it puts people from a particular group at a disadvantage.
Can you give us an example from a supply chain context?
Sure. Imagine a warehouse job where the company puts in a requirement. All applicants must be over 6 feet tall to reach the top shelves. Now, that rule applies to everyone, men and women.
But it's going to disproportionately disqualify women and people from certain ethnic backgrounds.
Exactly. And if the height isn't actually a critical requirement for the job, if you could just as easily provide a safe stepladder, then that's a classic case of indirect discrimination. You're filtering people out for a reason that isn't essential to performing the role.
And the impact of this on a business.
It's toxic. I mean, beyond the obvious legal risks and the terrible emotional distress it causes people, it's just bad for business. It destroys productivity, it increases absenteeism because people dread coming to a hostile environment, and it kills retention. You spend all this money recruiting great, diverse talent, and then they leave within a year because the culture is exclusionary.
The syllabus points out some very specific legal musts around recruitment. I think these are worth highlighting because this is where managers can really trip up.
Absolutely. In many of the jurisdictions covered by the CIPS standards, for example, an employer is legally barred from asking about health or disability before a job offer is made.
You can't just go fishing for someone's medical history in an interview.
Right. The only exception is if you need to determine if they can perform a specific intrinsic part of the job, like a test for heavy lifting.
And what about the questions around family and pregnancy?
This is a huge one. There are strict prohibitions on refusing to employ someone because they are pregnant. And this is the part many managers get wrong. You cannot ask a woman about her intentions to have children.
It doesn't matter how old she is or if she's married?
It doesn't matter at all. The question is, so do you plan on starting a family soon? Is completely off limits.
Because the implication is that you might not hire them if the answer is yes, which is discriminatory.
That's precisely the reason. Now, the source does mention a concept that sometimes confuses people, which is positive action.
How is that different from positive discrimination? Because that's usually illegal, right?
Correct. Positive discrimination, which is hiring someone just because they belong to a particular group, regardless of merit, is illegal in most places. You can't have a policy that says, we are only hiring men for this role.
So what is positive action then?
Positive action is about leveling the playing field. It means if you identify that a certain group is underrepresented in your workforce, say you have very few female engineers, you can take specific, targeted actions to encourage more of them to apply.
So you could host a recruitment fair specifically aimed at women in STEM, for example.
Exactly. Or you could offer mentorship programs for aspiring leaders from minority backgrounds. The key is, you aren't guaranteeing them the job. They still have to be the best candidate and win it on merit. You're just working to balance the pool of applicants you're choosing from. You're fixing the pipeline, not fixing the outcome.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift gears. We've talked about power. We've talked about building a diverse team. Now we have to actually do something. We need to implement that new software or reorganize the department. This brings us to Section 3, the psychology and mechanics of change.
And this, frankly, is where most strategic initiatives live or die. It's where leadership careers are made or broken.
The syllabus makes a key distinction right at the start between two types of change, evolutionary and revolutionary.
Evolution versus revolution. It sounds dramatic, and it often is.
So what's evolutionary change?
Evolutionary change is incremental. It's often bottom-up. Think of things like Kaizen in manufacturing or total quality management. It's the philosophy of, let's find small ways to improve this process by 1% every week.
So it's slow, it's proactive, and it's generally less painful for the organization.
Exactly. It's great for organizational learning because the team feels involved. They're often the ones suggesting the small improvements. It builds momentum over time.
And revolutionary change.
That's the big bang. It's transformational. It's top-down. And it's almost always reactive.
Reactive to what?
To a crisis. We're losing money fast. A new competitor just entered the market and is eating our lunch. Our core technology is now obsolete. The status quo is broken and needs to be completely overhauled.
This is when you hear terms like business process reengineering.
That's the one. It's about wiping the slate clean. Forget everything about how we used to approve suppliers. As of Monday, here is the new, completely different way. It's high risk, high stress, and usually happens very quickly.
To manage all this, the source gives us a few major models. Let's start with Kurt Lewin's three-step model. It sounds almost deceptively simple. Unfreeze, change, refreeze.
It does sound simple, but the psychology behind it is incredibly profound. Lewin's central argument is that you can't just introduce the change part, step 2, without doing the work of step 1, unfreeze.
What does unfreezing actually look like in practice?
It means you have to actively break the existing habit loop. You have to melt the current ingrained behaviors and attitudes.
Yep.
This means convincing people that the old way of doing things is no longer viable.
You have to sell the problem before you can sell a solution.
That is the perfect way to put it. If you don't unfreeze, people might nod along in the meeting, but their muscle memory will take over and they'll just keep doing the old thing the second you're not looking. You have to create a motivation to change by destabilizing the status quo.
And that seems to be where so many companies fail. They just send out an email saying, new software system goes live on Monday, with no unfreezing whatsoever.
They skip right to step 2, and then they fail at step 3, refreeze.
What does that involve?
Once the change has been made, you have to solidify it, make it the new normal. This means rewarding the new behaviors. It means updating the performance metrics, the job descriptions, the incentive plans.
If you don't, people will just snap back to the old way.
It's like a rubber band. If you don't lock the new state in place, the organization will naturally revert to what's comfortable as soon as the pressure is off.
Okay, next up we have Kotter's 8-step model. This feels much more like a detailed project plan.
It is. It's designed for those big, revolutionary, transformational changes. And notice his very first step. Create a sense of urgency.
It's that unfreezing idea again, but more forcefully put.
It is. You have to make people genuinely believe that staying the same is more painful and dangerous than the discomfort of changing. If we don't fix this broken supply chain, we will lose our biggest client within 6 months. It's about waking people up from their complacency.
And his second step is interesting. Build a guiding coalition. He's not saying the leader does it alone.
No, and that's critical. You cannot drive major change by yourself. You have to identify those key influencers in the organization, the people with the expert power and the referent power we talked about earlier, and get them on board.
Because if the most respected engineer on the team says the new system is a good idea, everyone else is more likely to listen.
Far more likely. You build a powerful group of champions first. Notice that you don't actually institute the change until step 8. It's a long runway of careful preparation.
Now, the third model is maybe my favorite just because it feels so human. Applying the Kubler-Ross grief cycle to business change. Why are we talking about grief?
Because for many employees, significant organizational change feels like a death. It truly is a form of loss.
Loss of what?
Loss of status, maybe. Loss of competence. I was the expert on the old system, and now with this new one, I'm a complete novice. Loss of social connections if teams are being broken up and reorganized. We have to acknowledge that there is a real emotional sense of loss that people go through.
And the stages are the classic ones: denial, anger.
Yes, it starts with denial. This is just another management fad. It'll blow over. I'll just keep doing my work the old way.
Then comes anger. How dare they do this to us? I've been here for 20 years. This is unfair.
After that, you often see bargaining. Okay, I see this is happening, but can we just keep the old spreadsheets for our department just for a few more months?
And then the tough one, depression.
I just can't do this anymore. This new system is too confusing. I'm going to be made obsolete. A sense of helplessness. And then finally, hopefully you get to acceptance.
I think for any manager listening, realizing that an employee who's sitting at their desk looking sullen isn't just being difficult, but might actually be in the depression stage of grieving for their old role, completely changes how you should approach them.
It has to. You don't yell at someone who's grieving. You support them. You offer training. You listen to their concerns. If you treat their emotional response as simple insubordination, you will lose them, either because they quit or because they check out mentally.
So that brings us to the actual implementation strategies. The source lists a whole spectrum, from power coercion on one end to facilitation on the other. When is it ever okay to use coercion?
In a genuine crisis.
Yeah.
If the building is on fire, you don't hold a focus group about which eggs to use. You shout orders. If the company is 3 days from bankruptcy, you don't have time for a long participatory process. You make top-down decisions. It's fast, but as we said before, it burns social capital and breeds deep resentment.
So it's a last resort. What are the better alternatives?
Well, there's negotiation. This is good when a specific group is losing out. You acknowledge their resistance and offer them something in return, a trade-off. It can create a win-win, but it's time-consuming.
And participation.
Participation is often the gold standard if you have time. You involve the people affected by the change in designing the solution. It creates immense buy-in and trust, but it can be very, very slow.
And, of course, education and communication.
That's non-negotiable in any change process. You have to constantly communicate to dispel rumors, because the story people tell themselves in the absence of information is always 1,000 times worse than the reality.
But people will still resist, even with the best plan in the world. The source lists the common reasons: self-interest, fear of becoming obsolete, simple misunderstanding. But the one that jumped out at me was disruption of social arrangements.
That one is so powerful and so often underestimated by leaders. People come to work for more than a paycheck. They come for their work family, their friends, their social circle.
The people they have lunch with every day.
Exactly. If a reorganization, even one that looks brilliant on a spreadsheet, is going to split up a team that really likes and trusts each other, they will fight it tooth and nail. They aren't fighting the business logic. They're fighting to protect their social environment. We are social animals.
Lewin has another tool for this, right? The force field analysis.
Yes, it's a fantastic visual tool for planning a change. You picture a piece of paper with a line down the middle. That line is the status quo.
Okay.
On the left side, you list all the driving forces, everything pushing for the change. Cost savings, new technology, customer demand, competitor pressure.
Yeah.
On the right side, you list all the restraining forces, everything pushing back: fear of the unknown, cost of new training, employee apathy, those social arrangements we just mentioned.
And the goal is to shift the line to the right, towards the change.
Right. And what most managers instinctively do is try to just add more driving forces. They shout louder about the benefits. They present more data.
They try to push harder.
Exactly. But what Lewin argues is that just increases the tension in the system. It's like pushing against a spring. The smarter strategy is to focus on removing or weakening the restraining forces.
Don't push harder. Remove the friction.
That's it. Address the fear. Provide the training. Find ways to keep the social groups together. It's a much more effective and less stressful way to enact change.
This all leads us to the final piece of this organizational puzzle, the invisible web that holds everything together. Section 4, the informal organization.
Or, as I like to call it, the real org chart.
The source defines this as the social networks that cut across all the formal boundaries. It has its own power structures, its own communication channels, the grapevine, the rumor mill, and its own unwritten rules and regimes.
And so many leaders see this as a problem to be crushed. They hate gossip. They want everyone to follow the official, formal lines of communication.
But the syllabus points out that the informal organization actually serves some vital functions.
It does. First, it satisfies deep social needs. Think of Maslow's hierarchy, the need for belonging. People find that in their informal work groups. It also provides a sense of stability in a constantly changing environment.
And honestly, it often creates workarounds for inefficient formal processes.
Oh, absolutely. The shadow process.
Yes. If the official procedure to get a purchase order approved takes 3 weeks and requires 5 signatures, but you know Sally in finance from the company softball team, and she can get it pushed through for you in an hour.
Then that informal network is what is actually keeping the business moving. Smart leaders don't try to destroy that network. They try to understand it and leverage it.
But it must create conflicts sometimes. The goals of the informal group might not align with the formal goals of the company.
It does create conflict. The source lists the common sources: poor communication, personality clashes, battles over scarce resources, incompatible goals between departments. And this is where it highlights contingency theory.
Which is the idea that there's no one best way to lead or manage.
Exactly. Your leadership style has to adapt to the specific situation, to the context, to the people involved. There's no magic formula.
It briefly mentions the Thomas Kilmann model for handling conflict, which measures assertiveness versus cooperativeness.
Right, which gives you 5 different styles. Sometimes, in an emergency, you need to be highly assertive and uncooperative. That's the competing style. You just make a decision.
But you can't use that all the time.
God, no. Other times, you realize you're wrong, and you need to be highly cooperative and unassertive. That's accommodating. You yield to build goodwill for later.
And the ideal, I'm guessing, is collaborating.
In an ideal world, yes. High assertiveness and high cooperativeness. You dig in to find a creative solution that fully satisfies everyone's concerns. But that takes a lot of time and trust. Often, in reality, you just have to compromise, split the difference, so everyone is a little bit unhappy but can move on. An ethical leader knows which style to use and when.
Okay, let's try and bring this all home. We've covered a massive amount of ground here, from the 6 sources of power to the grief cycle of change. What does this all mean for you, the listener, when you walk into work tomorrow?
I think it means that if you want to be a truly strategic and ethical leader, you have to learn to see below the surface of your organization. You have to understand that your job title gives you the right to speak, but it doesn't automatically give you the power to be heard.
That power comes from your expertise, your character, your relationships, your expert and referent power.
It does. And it means understanding that building a diverse and inclusive team is hard work. It will come with friction and challenges, but it is the only way to build an organization that's resilient and smart enough to thrive in a complex world.
And it means you have to respect the psychology of change. When you launch a new strategy, you aren't just moving pieces on a chessboard. You're dealing with human beings who are often going through a genuine process of loss.
You have to balance that need for order with the flexibility required to treat people like people, not like resources.
So here's my final provocative thought for you to take away and mull over. We talked about the shadow organization, that informal network of favors, chats, and relationships. Ask yourself this week, how much of the real work in your company actually gets done through the formal, official hierarchy?
And how much of it relies on those informal social networks you might be ignoring?
If you took away all the favors, all the quick chats in the hallway, all the relationships built over coffee, would your supply chain grind to a complete halt?
That's a genuinely scary thought for a lot of companies, but a very necessary one to consider.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.
It's always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.